is for almost a big dry place.
We took out part of the first panel in the front. And the frame seems to be in really good shape. It's painted, there's just a little bit of surface rust on it. So Krista just scrubbed it off, and it looks really good. So we had some trouble getting the first piece off because we didn't really know what we were looking for. It ended up being, well, first we tried to get the bolts out along the C-channel, and those weren't budging. And then we tried to cut them with like an oscillating tool, and that worked for a couple of them. And after a while, it was just, you know, our batteries died, and we were just like, this is stupid. So
it's taking forever.
We just adjusted our circular saw to a depth so that it wouldn't quite hit the frame, cut around it, and then we're going to try to take the bolts off from the inside with a ratchet and see if an edge to it that we can get to, which there should be.
We may regret this later when we have to cut the brand new piece of plywood to go in here. However, if Mike is right and we can get these bolts off from underneath, all we really do need is this outward perimeter anyways.
Yep. And then we can just measure the depth.
Yeah.
So.
Fingers crossed.
We are working on the subfloor, and we've been trying to find the best way to get the bolts off. Because there are two different types of bolts. There are, I guess, carriage bolts that actually are like a Phillips head screw. And those essentially look a lot like what's down here. So there are these bolts that are in the C-channel, and there's two. There's one over here and one over here. And then there are also these other bolts that do not have any kind of head on them. They are just flat. And presumably they're screwed up through using a wrench. And, you know, they're super long. They're like 2 or 3 inches. So I couldn't get it off because they were just too long, and my ratchet wouldn't reach. Then we tried to use this oscillating tool to cut them, and that worked for a couple of them, but it dulled the blades really quickly. And, you know, this is a really helpful tool to have for a number of reasons, but why so many people have been using it for that purpose, to cut these bolts, I don't know, because it took forever. It's going to dull your blades. You're going to run through blades way faster than if you just had a better tool. So we ended up just going and getting a reciprocating saw. This one's Makita. We were looking for the Ryobi one because pretty much all of our other power tools are Ryobi, but it was out of stock, and so we got this guy. And in the first bolt that I cut took about 3 seconds, and the hardest part about it was just getting it to fit between the subfloor and the C-channel. Essentially, I just used the oscillating tool to create enough space there, cut out some of that wood, and then on one of them I actually wedged a chisel in between the C-channel gently, because you don't want to warp the C-channel, but I put the chisel in there just to create some space, put the oscillating tool, and the longest it's taken to cut a bolt was like 10 seconds max. So this thing works great. An update on the bolt situation. So we were cutting the bolts using saw, and we were just cutting the bolts where they wouldn't come out. So I was doing more research, and I had come across this tool that I kind of wanted to try previously. I didn't buy it because I thought, you know, we'll just cut the bolt. And the more we were cutting the bolts, which we only cut a few, we just realized we didn't have access to those holes anymore if we were going to bolt down the new subfloor. So we were trying to figure out a way to get around that so that we could just get the bolts out easily and without damaging them or without damaging the frame, or like then having to drill new holes and all that stuff. So what I found works really well, and if you don't own this tool and you're doing one of these renovations, or you work on vehicles, whatever, maybe you already know about it, but it's one of these, and Eastwood makes one. It's called like the Screw Buster. This is not the Eastwood one. I found this on Amazon. It was like $40 for, you know, this portion of it. It comes with 4 different bits and then the handle so that you have control. So what it does is it uses the air pressure of like the pneumatic tool or the air gun that you have, and it just pounds on that screw. It'll knock the rust loose essentially that's underneath it, and then you twist manually with your hand as you're doing that to loosen the screw. And I was skeptical, despite the fact that there are like so many hundreds of good reviews about tools like this, and because I had tried lots of different things to get these stupid screws out, or bolts, and it does work amazingly enough. So I did 4 of them down here. I just did another one right in front of me, and I'm going to kick on the air compressor and then I'll record myself using it. Hopefully it doesn't fail this time, because I've done it 5 times in a row. So yeah, I'll show you guys what that looks like. So these are the bolts that I was able to get out. You can see the tops of them are just like super rusted, and that's where we couldn't even get them to budge. So that tool really does work. It just really pounds on top of the screw and loosens up the rust. And the hardest part about it is just twisting manually with your hand. So this isn't a plug for the tool. I'm not getting paid to say this at all, but it works. So this is the insulation that we're going to be using for the floor. This is just rock wool. It's rated for R15. Together, we just want to insulate this thing really well, especially because it is going to be like our primary dwelling. So we, went with this because part of it's recycled, so we like that. And then I think doing a little research, animals don't necessarily like it either. It's fire resistant, creates some sound barrier,
which is so needed. If you guys have ever lived in a camper before, which Mike and I are currently full-time living out of an RV. Luckily my parents have this, and it's super sweet of them to let us live out of this while we work. This camper has, if any insulation, very little. And so when Micah and I are going to sleep at night, you can literally hear the neighbors having a conversation, essentially. So we have lots of neighbors. There's lots of restaurants out here in the country that play loud music until 10 a.m. So we wanted to make sure that we invested in something that was going to be a sound barrier, most definitely, as well as our neighbor said that she lives in an aluminum tin can, of sorts. And when it rains, it's beautiful to hear the rain until it's just so unbearably loud. So we're trying to make sure that we're kind of getting something that is a little bit of everything. And something that Micah mentioned is that this is rated an R15. If you don't know anything about the ratings, which we did not know anything about, R15, R9, do some research on these. If you're looking into putting in insulation, it'll give you a good idea of what you need for the region that you're going to be living in or staying in or camping most of the time, as well as what the ratings really help with.
And also just bearing in mind that in a camper there's not much space between you and the outside. I think in this there's 1.5 inches of wall space, and it looks like maybe 6 inches from the subfloor down to the belly pan. So like that's a good amount of space to put something there. As far as dealing with the heat and the cold as well, in the walls, what our plan is, like we may use some of this rock wool for that. This is largely going to be for the floor, but overall for the walls, I think what we're going to do Reflectix and foam insulation. So Reflectix will, keep heat out, which we're finding out in this camper that we're staying in right now, it is not insulated at all. And so we're just running into, like, during the day, or like as the sun starts to come up, we'll be in bed still and we just start sweating or something, So
Or reaching into the closet and grabbing a shirt that feels like it just came fresh out of the dryer.
And because it's just not insulated. In some spots it is, but largely you can tell it's just not, or they did like an awful job. So Reflectix and foam on most of the walls and stuff, and then parts where it's more of a curvature and you need something a little bit more malleable, we'll probably use the rock wool. And also for the rock wool, we have plans to put in a wood stove. So around that area, because there's like another red version of this rock wool that's rated for higher temperatures and fire resistance. So we'll use that around that part of the wall.
And we'll make sure to take a video of that as well, and link both of these types of installations in the description. We got this at Home Depot for roughly,
I think it was $25 for that.
Yeah.
So each bag.
So we'll be able to show you guys how much this is going to cover with one big thing. So let's get to work and put this in. Hey guys, so Micah and I are out here working on this very hot day, and we actually waited a really long time to get outside. It's 100 degrees today, 100 degrees tomorrow, and it's really, really sunny. So we're trying to do the smart thing and working when it's cooler outside, and we are not early birds, which kind of stinks because we miss out on those hours. However, we want to give you guys an update of where we're at with what we're doing as we take our little water Gatorade break. So coming in to the camper, as you can see, Micah and I have ripped up part of the subfloor. Our plan is to do this piece by piece. Right now we're getting ready to move to the very next part, and that's going to be putting in our insulation. We'll show you guys what we're using there. As you can tell, there's brown paint and there's black paint. That wasn't on purpose, it was kind of an accident. We went to Home Depot to get more like rust preventative paint, and we ended up getting this stuff, thinking whatever, if it's brown, that's fine, it doesn't really matter. No one's going to be seeing the frame. We just want to make sure it's protected. You can see that we have pieces of the old subfloor put into the C-channel to help prevent it collapsing on itself. That's the biggest complaint about taking out the subfloor and replacing it. It's also the scariest part. So we wanted to make sure that we had it supported in those areas. However, I'm going to show you guys one mistake that we have made. It doesn't look that bad, but it's something that you definitely want to avoid doing if you're doing this. So this part here on the C-channel, you can kind of tell the bottom part of the C-channel is bent downwards. So we need to go ahead and take some pliers or something, squish it back up. But that was because when we were taking out this piece, Micah was having to bend it upwards because in this section right here, it was just so tight in there that we couldn't pull it out. We had to kind of wiggle it out, and bending the C-channel is definitely something you really want to try to avoid. So for future reference, don't do what we did. So anyways, I want to show you guys, Micah went through, he put in this kind of caulking sealant because we found multiple holes in the belly pan that were either from old screws or randomly cut there. Maybe they were cut there for the purpose of putting something through, we just don't know what. However, we don't have plans to put anything through these areas, so Micah went through and he put this foaming sealant in here, and now we're going to lay down our insulation. Something I do want to add is the belly pan did not look like this beforehand. There was 25 plus years of El Paso dust just built up on top of this silver aluminum, as well as flakes of old insulation and old rivet bits and all that jazz. So we did take the time to go through. We wiped down with Clorox, we wiped down with an SOS pad, and it's not perfect. As you can tell, it's not coming out super shiny. I think we're okay with that as long as there's not mouse feces and God knows what left. So we're going to go ahead and lay down our insulation now, which we're super excited for, because then that means that we're going to lay down the new piece of subfloor here pretty soon.
So here's with the rock wool installed. It's really easy to work with. You can cut it to whatever shape you need. It's great for these random pieces over here because they don't go underneath the frame right there. They're just kind of on their own. And yeah, we got it in there pretty tight, hoping that it, does all the things that it says it does. There's this moisture rodents. Hopefully we won't have any rodent problems. We're going to do our best to seal this thing really well, but moisture, keeping heat in, sound dampening, all that good stuff. So yeah, we're going to take another water break because it's hot and then try to put in this piece of subfloor.